Oh, hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. And this is the Rebel News Daily Live Stream. I'm your host, Sheila Gunn Reid, broadcasting from, as David Menzies likes to say, somewhere in the hinterlands of northern Alberta. And joining me today is my regular Monday co-host, Adam Sos in Calgary. Adam, how's it going?
Wonderful. Had a great weekend. How about yourself?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I did a little gardening. The weeds never take a day off. And I finally caught up on some sleep. And I think my circadian rhythm might be a little bit back in order after getting up in the middle of the night for an entire week to
Yeah.
meet with the team of Rebel News journalists that we had in Davos because of the time change. It was like 8 hours
Right.
ahead. And
Jet lag
anyway, it
minus
was
the trip.
yeah, that was exactly it. I was like, I feel like I'm jet lagged, but I really didn't leave the house very much
Mm.
this week. Now,
For me,
sorry, go ahead.
the weekend, it was interesting. I cleaned guns. I rode horses. I ate beef. The only thing
Fun.
I didn't do that liberals hate is trucking. So it was a pretty good weekend for me, I gotta say.
Though you did get your trucking fix, I think probably on Thursday, and we'll get to that in a
That's
little bit
right.
after I tell everybody what we're doing here. So, as I said, this is the Rebel News Daily live stream. We currently stream on YouTube. However, a lot of that is for spite, and a lot of that is because we don't want to abandon the 1.6 million sets of eyeballs who watch us there. But we are currently completely demonetized on YouTube. They, I think, would like to push us off the platform altogether, and they're bringing in these onerous rules where we could just step in a bear trap every single day just by doing the news, and they will kick us off the platform. There are certain things over there that we can't say. So we cannot question election integrity. We cannot question the advice of a public health officer, even though the public health officers seem to be questioning their own advice this far into the pandemic or
Yeah.
what the government. You know what? I'm already there. I'm
Yep.
already I'm already ready to stick my leg in that snare, so I better shut up. But to get around that, we are also streaming on Getter, so you can watch us there. We like Getter. It's a great free speechy network, but we're also on Rumble, Odyssey, and Super U. And the beauty of those three platforms is that they allow you to support the work that we do completely willingly, unlike what the CBC makes you do. Or, you know what? It's not just the CBC, it's all of the mainstream media. They're all pretty well subsidized by Justin Trudeau. So if you are watching us on Rumble, you can support us by leaving a paid chat called a Rumble Rant, and we'll read that on air. If you're watching us on Odyssey, you can leave us something called a hyper chat. That's their paid chat, and we'll read it on air. And if you are watching us on Super U, their paid chat is called the Shout. It's a great way to support us, but it also lets you have your say because, again, unlike the mainstream media, we don't close our comment section. We want to hear from you. We want your viewer feedback because without you, we really are unable to do any of the things that we do. So I think that's all the loose ends all tied up neatly, and hopefully I didn't get us nuked off of YouTube. I mean, it's a daily mating dance with them every single day, just two prairie chickens going in a circle. Anyways, I, I want to talk about our world premiere of
Yeah.
K2's trucker documentary. Sold out crowd, truckers showed up in limos, and the crowd loved it. K2 got an incredible standing ovation, and then we were doing another showing at the same place, Canyon Meadow Cinema, this Thursday. I think it's June 1st. And that's already sold out. So we're working on new
Yeah.
dates, but when you did the video showcasing sort of what was happening at the theater and the energy of the theater. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, it was incredible, and it was really crazy to see. First of all, Canyon Meadow Cinemas, great shout out to them for not being cancelable. Theaters are often one of those places where you have a diversity of opinions. We've seen a great deal of the theaters in Calgary willing to screen documentaries about convicted terrorists or other people in sympathetic light, and then they wouldn't show conservative or freedom-oriented films. So Canyon Meadows Cinema stepped up to the plate. And I think what's important, much like some of these non-YouTube platforms, is they allow people to have an opportunity to express their opinions, to sort of present their art and make that publicly available for people to form their own opinions on. So we were very fortunate that they brought us in. But yeah, talking to people there, We'll talk about the movie a little bit, not too much. We don't want to give too much away, but the sentiment that I got from many people is some of the energy of Coots, some of the energy of Milk River, certainly as I experienced it, was certainly present at the theater. The theater, I think they had maybe 50 or 70 other people there. But then for this movie, they're including all of us and people who showed up hoping to get tickets. There was like an extra 400 people pretty much in the building. And they definitely brought that energy, that freedom energy. Like you said, Chad Williamson of Williamson Law, truckerlawyer.ca was there. And then most of the team was down in Coots, Milk River, who are covering this were also there. So we got to engage with people. The VIP was really fun. Lots of people either were in Coots or they have friends or family who are down in Coots. Lots of people who regularly attend protests were also there. So it was very much sort of a coming together. Again, sold out, and I'm not at all surprised to see that the next one sold out as well. It was a pretty incredible night. As you can attest to, you were there.
Yeah, it felt like, and I said this in your video, it felt like there I am all dressed up nice, no plaid. It was odd. If I could have found a plaid dress, I would have worn one. But it felt like that same exciting energy when you guys were covering the blockade at Coots the first time. And Kian was our filmmaker extraordinary, Kian Simone. He had visions in his mind of, first of all, nobody showing up. And then secondly, people being disappointed with the quality of his work. And then when in moments of confidence, he thought, oh, well, maybe the truckers will show up in their trucks. Some of the guys who were at the Coots blockade, because he had heard that some of them were coming. But then the place is packed. He gets a standing ovation for like a full minute, and it's packed on a hockey game night, by the way.
Yeah.
And the trucker, look at this. This is Kian's standing ovation. This is so great.
Yeah.
And then the truckers show up in a limo.
Yeah, that was
because
great.
why not? It was awesome. So that's for people who are interested in other showings, because we're doing our best to put together some other showings in different parts of the province. Keep checking at truckerdocumentary.ca, because the importance of this documentary is not that we did it, although that's great. It goes through what it really was like there, not what you heard from politicians who weren't there or who got the story wrong, like Jason Kenney. It not from the mainstream media, who also got the story wrong. They weren't there. You're going to see things that you won't see anywhere else. The tense negotiations with the cops, where the truckers just wouldn't back down, even when the cops said, we are going to come take your trucks. That's the next thing that's going to happen here is enforcement. And they said, fine. The one trucker said, I'm not leaving here unless it's in a cruiser. And it wasn't that he was making a promise of violence. He was making a promise of civil disobedience. Hearing from the townspeople in Milk River, when you would hear in the mainstream media, Milk River is basically under siege because of the truckers. But that wasn't it at all. Milk River was being cut off from their friends and neighbors because of the RCMP blockade, trying to stop supporters from going into Coots. And the people in town were blaming the cops. We also saw it was very beautifully done. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but a lot of the stories you heard in the mainstream media about the disgruntled truckers stuck on the American side because of the blockade, some of that was fed by the truckers themselves. But when you actually got the full story, not even close. Not even close to what the mainstream media was reporting. But the mainstream media went down there with a story in mind, and they kept looking till they found something that fit what they wanted to tell.
What the truckers kept saying, and the people who were in Coots, or at least family members of people who were in Coots, was that's how it was. This documentary actually really doesn't inject much of Kian's personal opinion. It was his perspective as a journalist doing incredible journalism. Obviously Sid was there as well, but it very much is, here's what happened. We were the only people pointing our cameras at the location. There wasn't a bunch of interjection and opinion overlaying it. It was very sort of, here's what happened. Make your own opinions, form your own opinions for yourself. And I think that's important. And I think that's rare in these time certainly to see that. But yeah, the universal sentiment when I spoke to people over and over and over was, one, thank God you were there, because 100% some of the stuff Jason Kenney said, some of the stuff some of these mainstream media outlets were saying, if we weren't there with cameras on the other side capturing the actual content, which was prayer and singing of the national anthem and peaceful protest and willingness to compromise and sensible negotiation in the face of a RCMP that shut off the road and acted like Justin Trudeau's henchman. If we weren't there to capture that, the narrative probably still would have been twisted. So from many of the truckers, from many of the people who know the truckers, their families, the universal sentiment was, thank God there was real journalists there, and not just people who rolled up when something bad happened. Because I was there in Milk River for days and days, and it was incredible to see whenever there'd be some sort of stunt, or they'd try and roll trucks through with cattle and pitch the narrative that the cattle were suffering, they'd open the border and let them through, and mainstream media would literally roll up right at those moments to try and capture it. So yeah, really incredible to see. More to come, no doubt, more screenings, but also some elements of the story are not yet wrapped up. So I think Kean made one mistake, if I could criticize him in any way, shape, or form. He set the bar so high, he's really going to have to knock it out of the park on the next one. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to no doubt a great many films to come. Plus, I mean, we do have, I know Mocha has got the Ottawa Convoy, a documentary on that coming out very soon as well. Sid is working on a lengthy report. And he's kind of been talking. It's going to be broken up, I believe, into some segments.
Yeah,
and it's going to cover
be more like a docu-series, Sid's from his perspective, and he was there on days that Kean wasn't there in Cooch. So there's still more of this story that we are already sitting on.
Yeah. And I know he reached out to me as well. I think he's going to be talking to me, Celine, Mocha, getting some of that sort of side of the story. Because one of the things down there is you're so remote. There's barely any connection beyond that. Even the hotels have very limited data. I think I capped out the hotel's internet a couple times just trying to upload content. So we're just sitting on a sort of wealth of footage of all of these things, plus the Rebel copter trip down there. Like, there's so much additional content for us to kind of keep telling this story as it continues to develop. So yeah, by all means, keep checking in at truckerdocumentary.com. Working on other Alberta showings, but hopefully more than just Alberta showings as well. So yeah, some exciting times, certainly.
Yeah, we're working. You know what? I'm going to put the call out. If you're a theater owner, independent theater owner, you've had a hard time during the pandemic, obviously. But if you are cancel culture mob resilient and you want to show our movie, why don't you reach out to me? Send me an email to sheila@rebelnews.com, and we'll see what we can figure out. Canyon Meadow Cinemas. Yeah, they did. And Canyon Meadow Cinema packed a theater on a hockey game night, a Battle of Alberta playoff night. It was packed in there on a Thursday night. And you know, if you could use the business, boy, we'd sure love to give it to you. Yeah. So I'm just trying to go through the things that are in the YouTube headline so that I don't get emails. But the other thing on the news today is Trudeau's gun grab.
Yeah. So,
you know, he's lied about the truckers. Now he's lying about lawful Canadian gun owners. You see, all the security systems of a school in Texas failed. The police in that town failed. They arrested parents who were trying to go in and save the lives of their own children, because if that unarmed mom is more brave than you and your flak jacket and your sidearm, boy, that sure makes you look bad. So you don't want to let her go in. So much so that an off-duty Border Patrol officer, God bless the Border Patrol in Texas. They are really on the front line of everything, by the way. I think the bravest police force probably in the world, if not North America. Leaves the barber shop, borrows a shotgun, I think it was. Maybe it wasn't a shotgun. I want to say a shotgun.
That's what I heard too. I don't know if those reports are entirely confirmed, but yeah, that's the story out there.
What we do know is that he was at the barber shop, got a text from his wife, said something's happening at the school. And however the circumstances happened, he went there. And because of that, in another country where the security systems failed, where my kid goes to a rural school. I can't get in there without ringing the buzzer. And there
Yeah.
are almost no students in the school. And I went to the school, and all three of my kids went all the way through the school. They know exactly who I am. But even I can't get free reign of that school. I have to get buzzed in. But that wasn't the case at this school, that someone could just walk in with a firearm and then the police don't go in and arrest pleading mothers. But never, never let a tragedy go to waste if you're a liberal. And that's exactly what Justin Trudeau is doing today at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. So that's 2:30 out here in the West. The Prime Minister of Canada, the Public Safety Minister, the pathological liar Marco Mendicino, Minister of Justice and Attorney General David Lametti, another pathological habitual liar about the convoy. Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth, Marcy Yen. Obviously, she's there to say that we're going to make Canada's women more safe by disarming them, by taking my guns away.
Removing the great equalizer. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Something that settles the score between me and the burglar, that I have to presume that he's just a benevolent burglar. He's not here to rape and murder me. I have to just assume that he's here for my TV and my computers. But while help is a half an hour away, by the way. So she's there, and the president of the Privy Council and Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair, the guy who oversaw the spike in gang crime and gang violence in Toronto, he's here to save the country from the problem that he never dealt with in Toronto. They're there to make an announcement and hold a media availability. For some reason, Pablo Rodriguez, the Canadian Heritage Minister, will be there too. So they don't say what this is about, but we know what this is about. And it is they're announcing new firearms legislation that could revive the mandatory assault rifle. Thanks, Globe and Mail, for that. Assault rifle buyback program. There's no such thing as an assault rifle. And I'm sorry, but this order in council that banned 1,500 popular models of Canadian firearms also included such dangerous assault rifles as a 410 bird gun, which, I mean, if you were a robin, maybe that'll do you in. But that was on there because it looked cool. So when they say assault rifles, they're dealing with assault rifles in Canada. They're not dealing with that. And they're not dealing with how these guns are getting into the country, because that would involve tightening up our border security. And they can't even put a fence at Roxham Road, but they're going to do something to thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Canadian gun owners today, instead of dealing with how gangs are getting their hands on guns in this country.
Yeah, you know, it's so wild. And you saw the Texas, I believe it was senator saying like more people get shot in like a weekend in Chicago. There's all these Chicago. Serious, gun-free, heavily restricted. You can actually look at like the sort of firearms murder rates around the world, and it's all these countries that have no firearms whatsoever allowed. Like I think Honduras has the highest gun homicide rate in the world, and firearms aren't allowed. All the states and cities where they have the highest sort of gun death rates, they're places where they have restrictions in place. Listen, if someone is willing to barge into a school and commit a shooting, they don't care about rules about gun ownership. Most of these guns are, very often the guns are not acquired legally, but the posturing on this, even Beto O'Rourke doing this stunt where he shows up and literally dancing on graves, capitalizing on this tragedy. There's schools in the United States that have started they take retired veterans who are maybe needing a job and dealing with whatever, and they put them at the front of the school with a rifle. And guess what? Those places don't get hit. The other thing that's absolutely wild about this is, and a number of people commented on this on Twitter, is I think it was after Sandy Hook, they brought in how to make these schools immune, rather hard targets, sort of one-hit button, lock down the school, isolate to limit casualties, some glass replacement, stuff like that. They had this system in place that would make it incredibly difficult, beyond getting into like maybe one classroom or one area. But at that point, the school would be locked down. The person would be isolated. They also wanted to make sort of breach plans so teams could respond quickly, figure out which department to call, sort of Of course, they couldn't find funding for this. They can find 40 billion for the Ukraine in a day, but they couldn't find
Yeah.
funding to sort of alleviate this. So there's gun crimes, there's gang activity, there's systems in place to make targets hard targets. There's all these things you could do efficiently, and what's actually happening is they're going after law-abiding citizens who don't commit crimes, who already jump through more loops than any other sort of citizen, unless maybe except maybe unvaccinated Canadians now. But and they're going after those people who are already undergoing daily police checks, who have gone through screening, who have gone through testing, keep all their stuff safely locked up and maintained. Maybe they do skeet shooting on the weekend, maybe they do what, like, the targeted group here is not the sort of intended negative agents within society. And this is always the case. Someone who
Yeah.
illegally owns whether it's an AR-15 or a handgun or whatever it may be in Canada, bringing in more legislation and more restrictions is going to make my life more of a pain in the butt, but it's going to do nothing to affect the person who's a violent criminal and illegally has a firearm anyways. It makes no sense. And it's in line with Justin Trudeau, because most of what he does doesn't make any sense, but it's virtue signaling and it's political capital gain attempts anyways. But hopefully people see through this. It's sad to see every time something like this happens. These people really don't care, because like in a week they'll stop
Right.
talking about this. They're just
Right.
having
They
this
don't.
conversation. Yeah,
Right.
go ahead.
They don't care about
Yeah,
making schools safer. They
no,
don't care about protecting those little soft targets that we tuck into their beds every night. They don't care about them. They
yeah,
only care insofar as what it means for gun control for the rest of us.
yeah,
They could easily, with a few little changes, make those schools as safe as our banks. But they
yeah,
won't do that, because if you do that, there's no excuse to grab somebody else's guns. By the way, Beto O'Rourke, what a disgusting vulture of a man.
yeah,
If the stories are true and that off-duty Border Patrol officer borrowed somebody else's firearm to go to the school and do what all of those cops wouldn't do, if Beto O'Rourke had his way, that firearm that the Border Patrol officer borrowed would not
wouldn't have
have
been
been
there.
available for him
Yeah,
to borrow and save some lives.
yeah,
Secondarily, we don't have to look back very far. 2017, remember the Sutherland Springs church shooting?
yeah,
It was Stephen Williford, the man who shot and chased the man who killed
yeah,
26 people in a Texas church. He was an NRA instructor. He was
yeah,
carrying that day.
yeah.
26 lives lost that day, but the carnage was stopped by an NRA trained instructor. These are
Well,
good guys with
May
guns that are doing this
May
when the police fail.
yeah, yeah. May of this year, there was a grad. This barely made the news cycles. I don't know if we can pull it up quickly. If you look this up, there was a grad celebration somewhere in the United States. And I think she was a female NRA member, someone who was amidst the grad ceremony. I think like one or two people got shot, and then the person had a sidearm, and they took out this person who was shooting at this grad ceremony. It would have been a mass shooting. It would have been a massacre, 100%. But one of the people who happened to be part of this ceremony fired back. I think this was towards the end of May of this year. They fired
Yeah.
back and they put an end to it. Like this sort of thing happens frequently enough. Good guys with guns. Listen, people call the cops because they're good guys with guns theoretically, and they think that they're going to rush in and help them. Eliminate the middleman. Like
Yeah.
I actually
Well,
think it's borderline unbelievable that you have armed guards, and this is people have said this 100 times. You kind of alluded to it, but you have armed guards in banks, but not at
yeah.
schools.
Yeah. Banks, sporting events, all of our
Yeah.
fancy people, they get protected by armed guards with guns, and that's fine. But our
Hmm.
kids are not. Why?
Yeah.
And secondarily, I'm sorry, but you know what I learned recently is that the cops, even if they're there, they might not help you.
Yeah.
Even if they're there, they might not do the thing that you need them to do because they won't have the guts.
Yeah.
Even though they put on that uniform, and that's the deal. You put on that uniform, you sign up for that job. Sometimes that means risking your lives for total strangers.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can't do it. They are not, I guess the right word is battle tested, which is why I'm an advocate for putting battle tested veterans in those schools because
Yeah.
they have done this. They've faced down the bad guy and come out the other side. Apparently, some Texas cops cannot. And so, what did I learn? What did I learn? That even if the cops came to save me, they might not save me. And I'm the only person who can save me. And Justin Trudeau, and I guess the women's minister, which is a job, who knew? They want me to be less safe because I don't know, something happened in Texas, the cops failed, the systems failed, and it was a good guy who was acting that day as a civilian because he was off duty with a gun,
Yeah.
who put a stop to all of this, like it happens so often. But I don't get that option here as a Canadian woman. I won't
No.
after today.
Well, and this, how inept and how absurd is the situation politically, broadly speaking. I mean, it goes all the way from the World Economic Forum to certain European leaders, Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau. Everything they do is sort of vapid signaling that costs billions of dollars, and they all line their pockets. Whether it's this additional headaches for me to register, it means nothing that they have more paperwork about the firearms that I happen to own or you happen to own. It means nothing. It means nothing that I'm paying more for carbon taxes. I mean, like, all of this stuff is just absolutely meaningless. And it's just a few further signifier that we need far, far less government in this country. You don't need to know what vehicle I drive. You don't need to know if I'm going fishing. You don't need to know if I'm going hunting. This is none of your business. You need to butt out of it, absolutely. You certainly don't need to know what I'm reading, what I'm saying, what journalism outlets I choose to pay attention to or not. It's none of your business. The government needs to stop taxing us for this junk, because they're just spending all of our money on telling us how to live our lives, and it's often to absolutely no effect. Ultimately, they're taking our money, giving it to our friends through these redistribution schemes, through absurd laws like this. And all these things do, they don't ameliorate, they don't reduce the amount of shootings, they don't ameliorate the quality of our life, they don't add a boon to our economy, they do nothing other than centralizing power. All of these types of grabs that you see, gun control grabs, media control grabs, these sort of are the precursors to increasing totalitarian trends. Travel bans and restrictions, everything you're seeing right now are all the sort of the marks that you watch for when a country begins to fall or begins to become totalitarian. They're all clearly on display now, and this isn't conspiratorial. This is self-evident to anyone who's ever read a book. If you don't get that, you need to start paying attention, because ultimately it may not happen in Canada. Hopefully there's enough safeguards in place that we don't fall all the way there. But that is what Justin Trudeau wants. When he says he has a basic admiration for the Chinese basic dictatorship, that's not him saying like he appreciates they can get some stuff done more quickly. That's him saying that's what he wants. And all of his actions indicate that as well.
Well, and everything they do lately does the opposite of the things they intended to do. For example, spending all this money on a potential gun buyback of the guns that they banned, the guns that weren't involved in crimes that they're banning. Because that's the truth. These are lawfully held, lawfully purchased Canadian guns. So obviously they aren't crime guns. So you're first of all, you're banning them. Then you are instituting a backdoor registry for purchases, which, I mean, every time you create a registry, you create a bureaucracy. So that's going to be enormously expensive. And then you have a multi-billion-dollar, sounds like, gun buyback program coming. So where you force these people who have to sell their private property to you at a rate that you've determined it's worth against their will, or they will go to jail. That costs money. Imagine if they just, I don't know, ramped up the gang enforcement, did a little gang intel in Toronto, Montreal, and probably Vancouver, and put up a fence at Roxham Road. Put up a fence where the guns are coming into the country. I hear they're really good at putting up fences in Ontario. I mean, I think they still have them up in Ottawa. Find that sign, or find that fence guy, get him to put some up at the border. Just find that guy. But and then they also simultaneously focus on like defunding the police and Black Lives Matter, when the answer, and it's getting real hard to be a police advocate these days, But the answer, a lot of times in these gang plagued minority communities, it's not less police, it's more
Yeah.
police.
Yeah.
The great example of this is Hobima, which is now called Masquachis.
Yeah.
Masquachis? Masquachis. I can never say it. But Hobima. It was the Louisville, Montana First Nation. They've since changed the name back to the Indigenous name. Great. The community did need a rebrand, that's for sure. Used to be plagued by gangs.
Yeah.
Plagued by gangs. The gangs ran the show. They would shoot at cops in the community. And the community was scared to approach the police because you don't want to be a narc when the gangs are running your community.
Right.
And instead of backing off and saying, okay, well, it's dangerous for us as cops to be here, the community doesn't want to cooperate with us because they're scared. You know what they did? They policed the daylights out of the place. Broken
Yeah.
window policing, every little thing they were policing. The police presence was there. They wanted the police to be more present than the gangs. And
Yeah.
then, secondarily, instead of saying to young people, the police are your enemy and we should defund them and you shouldn't trust them because they're going to come after you because you're a minority, they did the opposite. The RCMP
Yeah.
created the Hobima Community Cadet Corps. And it was like an RCMP cadets for kids. And it is the world's largest Indigenous community cadet program. There were, I think, it was like almost every kid who wasn't involved in gangs went into this program.
Yeah.
1,013 kids, I think, at its height, and taught kids skills, civic mindedness. It was something the kids could do that wasn't a gang, and
Yeah.
it changed the fabric of the community. And instead of Justin Trudeau saying, hey, what did you do to turn around an entire reserve? He says, you know what, Toronto, you're plagued by gang violence. Your young people are falling into gangs, particularly in minority communities. Let's make them hate the cops, mistrust the cops, although the cops aren't doing themselves any favors in some
No.
instances. But even the good cops, like let's make them mistrust the cops and let's
Yeah.
pull the cops out of those communities, which just gives the gangs free reign and it makes the community feel abandoned. And that's
Yeah.
the last thing they need. But again, instead of doing what they're supposed to be doing, public safety, actual public safety, the Liberals take the path of least resistance and go against the most law-abiding people in the country.
Yeah, it's there's no rationality behind it. There's no like justification behind it. The only like sensible sort of conclusion or outcome from this is 1 power gained and 2 points scored with their globalist friends. That those are the sort of outcomes of this. It's not going to reduce crime. There's a million things they could do to reduce crime, and to your point, sort of enabling police and having police not be a political arm for sort of enforcement against communities and for freedom, but instead of having them serve as this political arm of oppression and control and feeding into this narrative. All of this extends back to their sort of the consolidation of power, and very often like what we're seeing happen with police in these communities. They're like, no, you can only trust the government. You can't even trust the police anymore. You can only trust Big Brother, because the police, they're kind of, some of them at least, they're still bound by this charter thing in the criminal code. There's still some of them we couldn't quite break. There's some still wearing that thin blue line there, so we can't break all of them. So we need to get them out of the picture too, because as long as we have you all vulnerable, as long as we have you all dependent and squalor, they want everyone living in these unpoliced ghetto communities where you're dependent on either Justin Trudeau or the World Economic Forum, whoever the heck else it may be, to give you your stipend for your bread line. That's what they want everyone in, and they want everyone dependent, and they want everyone voting for the person who promises to give them the most money, because they don't care about debt and they don't think about money and numbers, as Justin Trudeau says. They want everyone sort of hooked and addicted on this system, every bit as much as you see it with these safe injection sites. They want all of society sort of dependent and coming back to the source, which in their mind is them.
Yeah,
really,
well,
it's the
and
taxpayers,
look at the fruits of their labors, right?
Yeah.
So they ban a bunch of Canadian firearms. Gun crime goes up because Justin Trudeau gets elected. He doesn't believe in closing the borders, which is where all the guns and fentanyl come into the country, which fuels, that's the industry of gangs, right? So you've got more money, guns, and fentanyl coming in, and so the gangs are doing well. And so what does Justin Trudeau do? Doesn't close the border, attacks Canadian firearms owners, and what continues to happen? Gang violence continues to go up. So what does Justin Trudeau continue to do? Go back to the well, and he attacks Canadian gun owners again. And guess what continues to happen? Gang violence continues to go up and up and up and up. And again, instead of doing something completely different and saying, you know what? Why is this happening? We did these other things 3 times. Nothing changed. They never stop and reassess. And that has been the theme of this government, which is a great segue into the fact that they are continuing, again, without evidence. With the travel bans. Now, we had an order paper question, a story I did a little while ago about how they asked for, the opposition party asked for evidence of whether or not they've even studied if there were transmissions of coronavirus happening on airplanes. Because the airplanes are where the hardest restrictions still exist. You got a mask, you can't get on one unless you have a vaccine. They still, for some reason, want you to stand 6 feet apart at the airport, but you can't do that because of the outrageous lines at Pearson. But this is the thing. This is the place. And then
sit beside each other.
And then you sit beside each other in it, like right up against each other in a hermetically sealed tube. But they have not studied this at all. They have not collected any data about this whatsoever. But they're still doing this thing. They have no data about COVID outbreaks on airplanes. So they don't even if an outbreak did happen, they don't even know what it was attributed to or anything like that, or trains either. And yet, without evidence, they are still doing this thing because it is not about evidence. It is about punishing the non-compliant. It is about bringing them to bear. And if they won't get under your boot, then punish them forever. That's what this is about.
Well, and it's the same thing, and we'll move on to this, of course. And I think we've got a clip Maxime Bernier tweeted where they address this, but it's so incredible how much the same thing. They what they don't want is sporting firearms owners or hunters to have guns or think that they're entitled to guns. That's what all these laws are about. They want you just to tap out. And one thing that was incredibly interesting, there was a Vice report some time ago about a girl who's very sort of anti-firearms. And she didn't know anything about firearms. So she took the course, got some guns, started shooting, eventually sold her guns and stopped renewing because she said that she's 100% in favor of guns after all that. But there's just too many loopholes. And she was too concerned about government last minute shifts somehow making her a criminal. So it's the same thing here. It's not about ending gun crime. It's about people who have different ideologies sort of exhausting them into submission. It's the same thing with this travel thing. Just get vaccinated. Just do it. Just compromise on your beliefs, whether they're religious or medical or personal or whatever. Just give in. Just give in. And that's what this is about too.
Yeah. And why don't we show that Bernier clip, and then we'll go into that crazy professor who's mad at Jordan Peterson for pointing out the cruel inhumanity of these travel restrictions.
What does the research tell us now about the risk for air passengers contracting COVID-19 on commercial flights?
Yeah, so there's been very few reports, extremely rare reports actually, of transmission aboard aircrafts. And I think we are learning more and more about some of the technologies, if you like, in terms of the ventilation and the way that aircraft ventilations work is actually, the modern aircraft is actually really good in terms of air exchanges and the way that the airflow occurs in the cabin. So there has been a few reports, but actually very, very little. I think we continue to ask provinces to report to us if you've seen reports to actual positive passengers, but have not demonstrated an actual transmission on board the aircraft itself. We have not received that kind of report. But the other thing is that in that setting, there are ways in which you could put in procedures like mask wearing. People are sitting facing the same direction with seat backs, in front of them. So there are a number of reasons, perhaps, as to why we are actually not seeing the actual conveyance itself as being a main area or setting of spread.
They're so lazy. Like there is a bunch of research. They used to have all these, like airlines had these protocols about contacting people within a certain area of someone when there's a positive case within the rows. Like like she's supposed to be in charge of this, and I know more than this about this than she does.
Not a
Like
smart woman, I don't think.
no,
I really don't.
Like that's just yeah. And even like
It's-
to her point there, because like, and this is straight from Pfizer, straight from we know about the reduction of severity of outcomes, but now compared to the original sort of narrative on vaccines, the reduction of spread is lowered than what they originally thought. This is publicly, I'm agreeing with the public health officials here. So
yeah, this is on the Ontario website.
Yeah.
So let's just before we get canceled.
So the she's saying it's very rare that it spreads, and then the Ontario sort of official government websites and statistics say that the vaccine doesn't, its focus is reducing severity of income, not potentially reducing spread. So with all those factors combined, what on earth is the justification for continuing this, especially when the whole world has dropped it, by the way?
Well, yeah, and you can go to a Flames game. Well, you can't now, but you can go.
Yeah. Hey,
I know.
Hey, at least we don't live in Edmonton, but yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. It's fine. That's a fair argument.
Okay.
But you can go to an Oilers game if you want to go to the hellscape of Edmonton to go to one. And you can wait in line in a packed building. Yeah. And then once again, as she says, sit side by side, everybody all facing the same way. No mask, no vaccine passport. And sometimes, depending on where you're trying to get to in the country, those Oilers games are a lot longer than a flight. Actually, maybe they feel a lot longer because you're trapped in Edmonton for a little bit. But so why can this no longer makes sense to even the true believers? Why can't people just get on a plane the same way they can get on the LRT or into a hockey game? It makes no sense whatsoever. And people are seeing it. Even the truest COVID anxiety balls of people, they even see this as a little bit not making any sense.
Unless the small businesses, the big businesses, Calgary Sports Entertainment, whatever, they were losing so much money. So they said, we're not doing this anymore. And so we're going to go ahead. But then the federally regulated, restricted organizations and businesses that are under the heavy sort of control of the government, they could be muscled into keeping in this thing, which would see people who want to go on family vacations, maybe even want to just get home for a funeral, maybe need to travel somewhere for business. It's the last continued serious bit of pressure that is seeing people extremely limited, and the extent of this is absolutely like unbelievable. I know I just did, and it'll be out later today or tomorrow probably, an extensive interview with Danielle Smith, who is in the leadership of the United Conservative Party, but she's also a business owner down in High River, and she's actually saying it's been so dramatic, the number of people who cannot travel, that small towns are actually booming. Because people are forced to, now that some of the restrictions stuff can open up again, but some of the small towns are actually booming because no one can travel anywhere. They're just having to stay within a couple hours of their own place. They can't fly anywhere. So this is affecting Canadians on a massive scale. And there's no logic to it anymore. It is simply that last sort of thumb of pressure on people, trying to keep them down, trying to push them. You're inevitably going to have a wedding or a funeral or something you need to get to. And we're just going to keep this last thing on top of you. I've had conversations with friends who are sort of true believers, and when I tell them I can't go on a vacation, like I have to drive a couple hours, I can't go to the US necessarily. Sometimes you can get in, sometimes you can't, but I have to drive if I want to go anywhere. I can't go on a vacation. I can't fly somewhere. I can't take my family somewhere in that way. And it's because of this ridiculous mandate. Even the true believers start to go, So we can sit at a Flames game, we can go to a restaurant, we can go to a movie theater, don't need to wear a mask, everything is open, but you can't fly somewhere for work.
Yeah, for work even, not just for pleasure.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good segue into Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's recent tweet. He said, "I'm at my daughter's wedding in California. I will never forget, Justin Trudeau, that my father is not here because of your utterly unconscionable, unconstitutional, and vindictive travel ban." So that's just Jordan Peterson's dad can't come to his daughter's wedding in California. And there is a very not bright man, although this goes to my theory. Again, these people confirm all my biases, and it's not good for me because I try to be open-minded, where I think that some of the dumbest people in the world exist in academia, in the places of higher learning, because there is a real piece of work here. What's his name? Professor Amir Adaran. I forget what university does he teach for again?
Laurier, or am I wrong?
I think it's Laurier. Anyway, can you bring that tweet back up? Because all the fancy people now are like, oh, Justin Trudeau or Jordan Peterson thinks that Justin Trudeau controls the American border. Because it is true, the Americans will not let in unvaccinated Canadians. But here's the problem. He says, you lying, blah, blah, blah. It's the Americans who forbid unvaccinated Canadians from entering their country. There's no rule preventing them from leaving Canada. Hang on, we'll get to that.
Plus, from the University of Ottawa.
Plus, this is the worst part. Plus, your family must not love your dad very much to plan the wedding where he can't attend.
Yeah. University of Ottawa waiting for a reply from you on this freaking goon. Like, what? First of all, just factually, lying sack of shit. He's excuse the French, but this is the professor from University of Ottawa saying this. He's saying what happened, his personal experience, and it's what actually happened. It's a factual account of what happened. Secondarily, you cannot get on a plane, and that's how you get to these places. Like, this guy does not have basic reading comprehension. He's a professor somehow. Like, he can't, his dad isn't there because Justin Trudeau won't let his dad get on a plane. If that's too complicated for you, we can make it even simpler. But this is unbelievable. Like, it's the anger, and it's commonplace now. This vitriol, this anger, because his assumption is, oh well, anyone who's unvaccinated is a POS. That's their.
And
that's
you
his
must
opinion.
hate your dad. You must hate your dad.
You hate your dad. Yeah. Sick.
But these are the people who are teaching our young minds. He's at the University of Ottawa. Like I said I just threw my pen. Imagine being professor of law and medicine.
Oh God.
Could you imagine? He just got two things completely wrong about law and medicine, by the way. Litigator, scientist, naturally a bicyclist. This guy got the facts of the law completely wrong. An unvaccinated Canadian cannot get on an airplane to leave the country, to travel within the country. That's a travel ban. Those are just the facts. But imagine being a young conservative in his class. Imagine you would have to self-censor every single day so that this guy didn't accuse you of hating your parents, being a lying sack of garbage. That's what I think young conservative minds are facing, not just at the University of Ottawa, but every university across the country. I'm an advocate of trade school. Send your kids to trade school so they don't have a gazillion dollars in debt when they get out, to be utterly unemployable and brainwashed at the hands of people like this guy.
No, I mean, critical thinkers who come out of humanities schools are often in spite of it, not because of it. I think that there can be value in that, certainly, but what's happened in these schools, very many of the sort of influential and free-thinking professors are being forced out, shown the door, bullied, all of this stuff. Francis Widdowson is a sort of prime example of that. But the vulgarity and the audacity. I was reading his tweet that he put out publicly, and I felt sort of gross doing it because the language is so vulgar. And this is a professor that forms minds, and it's become all too commonplace that that liberals are vulgar and gross in this way. Like just the vitriol. We don't know, like, just to assume maybe, I don't know, maybe the whole family is down there, maybe the majority of the family is down there. It was maybe they can't come into Canada or fly to Canada. We don't know what the circumstances are, but just to say you're a terrible, your whole family's terrible, you didn't even plan for your dad. It's just such an absurd, ridiculous sentiment. I mean, he's the type of person who'd be saying, and I don't know if you have anything else on this, but to sort of segue, we saw this sort of interaction with Jagmeet Singh, and people online were saying, oh, the people who dislike this are white supremacists. This guy probably calls anyone who agrees with him a white supremacist, a POS, whatever it may be. But I mean, I think the fact of the matter is the working class, the middle class, even the upper middle class is comprised of, guess what, just not white people. It's comprised of lots of people of lots of different faiths, and people are starting to wake up and get sick of this. Justin Trudeau can't show up. Jagmeet Singh's getting the same thing. We can take a clip. We can even jump to some of the audio of Jagmeet Singh. I think was trying to show up here for this. So let's.
He was in Brampton.
Yeah.
We got questions. Who's starting anything? Don't get out of your head, bro. Don't say that out loud if you don't want to. Hey, yo, don't be mean. We got questions. We got questions. Running Fudger Singh. That's his new name. Fudger Singh. Questions, bro. Fake meat and fat meat. The wrong kind. Jagmeet, I'm wearing a mask, bro. You gotta respect me. Hey, Jagmeet, don't sell out, bro. Don't sell out. Where you going? Where you going? Pussy. Pussy. You're selling out, Jagmeet. Sell out thing, bro. You sold out of Gom, bro. You sold out of Gom. Watch out. Punk pussy.
Internalized white supremacy strikes again.
He should have, maybe he's a bad guy, clearly. He should have thought to have his event somewhere else other than Brampton.
You know, it's funny though, because the left will say, like, this is internalized white supremacy, that somehow white people got in the minds of these obvious Sikh men and controlled them, which is absolutely the bigotry of low expectations. That you would think that those Sikh men can't make up their own mind about Jagmeet Singh and his weird alliance with Justin Trudeau, where he criticizes him but still keeps him in power. That those Sikh men don't have the wherewithal to make up their own minds and form their own opinions about Justin Trudeau without being controlled, mind controlled by white people. That seems pretty racist to me, actually.
And like the Biden, if you don't vote for me, are you even black or whatever he said, that absurd narrative.
You ain't black.
Like, it's incredible. And I'm sure this professor is amidst the sort of ranks of the people who would do this type of thing. But to them, they think, well, obviously they're going to vote for Jagmeet Singh because they kind of look like him. Sorry to break it to you, but there's people from different backgrounds, different communities, different races, or the same races that share different perspectives. They're not all just these token blocks, as you'd very much love as progressive. They're actually individuals with thoughts and ideas, believe it or not. I know that doesn't jive with your narrative, but to see this happen and to see this sort of, you see the popularity of both of these people. You have two, Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, both wildly unpopular, can barely show their face in public, are leaving through back doors, and they're propping each other up. This is
would you hitch your wagon to that horse? I'm not so sure, but he did.
Yeah. It's and I mean, they're holding on to the last sort of, I'm concerned for the next little while, because they're probably going to do as much damage and bring in as much control mechanisms as they can for the foreseeable future. But Jagmeet Singh, literally as he's partnering with the Liberals to keep them in power, is criticizing the Conservatives for partnering with the Liberals and keeping them in power. It's absolutely just backwards nonsense. And this is not what the sort of minority collaborative government. It's not supposed to be two wildly hated minorities pairing together and propping each other up, despite the fact they disagree with each other. This is sort of a broken parliament in many ways. And again, you're seeing it sort of manifest within communities that they would expect would just be going to bat for them and advocating for them. Certainly not the case anymore. So hopefully that means good things in the next federal election, but that certainly remains to be seen.
Olivia, do we have more than just that one chat? I'm just looking to see how much time I should allot for the rest of the show. Okay, so maybe we'll go into this. First reading from the National Post. Why much of what you've heard about the residential school graves is wrong.
Yeah. And as we get into this is another that fits very much into the category of not doing anything to ameliorate the situation for people currently, of using sometimes false information or blowing information out of proportion or mischaracterizing information in order to score points without ever actually making a meaningful change or tangible action on this front.
Right. So, and this is interesting because why much of what you read about residential school graves is wrong. Also, the Supreme Court rules you can now murder as much as you want and still apply for parole. That also, I mean, again, Justin Trudeau is making a big announcement today that he's going to grab guns from people like you and me, but you can be a mass murderer, a school shooter even, a Paul Bernardo type. And you still are able to apply for parole in Canada. That's not to say that you should get it, but symbolically, we should not even allow the worst of the worst to see the other side of a prison cell. Now, this story goes on to say that this week marks the 1-year anniversary of announcing the results of ground-penetrating radar that turned up 215 underground anomalies. That's the right word to use here. They suspected were the unmarked graves of students who had died while attending the Kamloops Indian Residential School. This one announcement, sorry, I was going to skip ahead. The leadership might have believed they were merely releasing an update on a fact that was already well known within the Indigenous community, that thousands of children did not come home from residential school and were almost always buried on site, usually a cost-saving measure. But this one announcement kicked off Canada's most seismic reckonings of the traumas within the Indian residential school system. Canada Day was cancelled. Historic churches fell to arson. Flags were kept at half-mast for 5 months, the longest in the history of the Commonwealth. Ground radar surveys across Canada were soon adding hundreds of new suspected graves to the initial 215 tally. Except that so much of the media and political narrative that summer was false. There were no mass graves. There was no evidence of mass murder. There's no evidence the graves were deliberately concealed. And in several cases, First Nations explicitly stressed that the radar surveys were likely turning up graves without any immediate links to nearby residential schools. In a comprehensive feature for the National Post, veteran writer Terry Glavin delved into how the national narrative on unmarked graves spun so quickly off the rails and how the story was largely hijacked by non-Indigenous voices. What happened last summer wasn't about Indigenous people telling lies or grifting the government. It would be more accurate to say it was the other way around. It was never a secret that mass student death was endemic at residential schools. Not one First Nation claims to have found a mass grave. That was all media that said that. Many of the rediscovered graves, this is an important point, many of the rediscovered graves were in known cemeteries, and some were found to have inconclusive connections to nearby residential schools. These are unmarked cemeteries.
Yeah.
Unmarked cemeteries. Overgrown cemeteries. Churches were burned. The Pope is coming to visit, and this is going to be front and center, and it is all constructed on lies. It's
just the latest, and don't get me wrong, like this is not by any stretch of the imagination to undermine what happened at residential schools.
No, of course not.
It was very much sort of a product of the time. People in Europe, they sent their own kids off to boarding school. They didn't understand sort of the communal village sort of life component for Indigenous communities, and they showed up and they just rubber stamped their own plans on a group of people with no consideration. People died, people suffered. There was horrific abuse, sexual abuse. That stuff all happened 100%. But we need to deal with those things, address those realities. We need to address current issues. I think for most of these people who suffered through this, even when you talk to them, the way to make it right is to make sure kids and Indigenous communities can have baths without their skin burning, rather than just Justin Trudeau posing.
Also that we protect parents, all parents, and their
Yeah.
right to raise their kids in their culture and in their way that they see fit without the government meddling. That is,
Yeah.
I think, one of those themes that cuts across all communities in Canada. Get out
Yeah.
of the lives of parents. Allow parents to make medical choices and schooling choices for their kids without the paternalistic state deciding what's right for them. But as you
And-
say, we know residential schools were bad, terrible in many instances. But the constant embellishment
Yeah.
with this doesn't do anybody any favors.
Yeah.
It just turns it turns sympathetic people skeptical against this.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is, I mean, they for all this talk from Justin Trudeau about how it was colonial and evil and we can't impose, like in Indigenous communities, many of them are very apprehensive towards vaccines, and they felt pressured and forced to get vaccinated. That you're literally carrying out
Repeating
injustices and forced colonialism against these communities by trying to mandate and fear and pressure them into doing this stuff. Very often Indigenous people working within government offices needing to be vaccinated to carry on some of those jobs as well. So not learning from history, repeating it, being willing to go out there and pose, going surfing when you are invited out to actually attend one of these events. But yeah, it's just never ending virtue signaling. And the extent and I'm going to have actually one of the things that is so absolutely important is media literacy, like the capacity to read what mainstream media puts out and kind of looks through it. I'm actually going to have Sister Helena Burns on in a couple of weeks. Who's a religious sister, but her master's is actually in media literacy.
Yeah.
So she's going to talk about critical sort of thinking on some of these issues. If people were critical and mistrusting of mainstream media, which they should be, this never would have taken off. People would have said, hold on a second, this seems insanely horrific. Which if it were entirely true, it would be insanely horrific. Lots of the sort of genocide sentiments of if this was mass murder would be all valid.
We were told this was like Pol Pot style mass graves.
Yeah.
And then they didn't even excavate. They didn't bother to call in the police. And that's when I became skeptical. I'm like, well, we can figure out what's going on here. Let's treat this like a crime scene, right? Like we're reacting like a mass murder crime happened here. Let's figure out what happened. There are forensic specialists in the world who deal with this sort of stuff. It happened in Bosnia and Croatia, the former Yugoslavia, where in modern times they had to deal with that, deal with, unearthing mass graves and figuring out what happened. There are those people around. Why were they never called in here? That's why I was skeptical. As soon as, the initial sort of died down, I'm like, well, what happens from here? Where's the investigation now?
I think that's what they were hoping was going to happen, was there'd be an initial thing. Justin Trudeau could claim, like Beto O'Rourke, whatever, they're the ones doing something, and then everyone would forget about it. Except when what you allege is genocide. Like you literally made allegations of serious genocide level crimes. People don't just forget and move on to the next thing. Often the conservatives who were maybe skeptical at first, those same conservatives, myself included, are the ones still saying, well, we need to get to the bottom of this. This isn't right. These people, they like we said, they don't care about kids in schools. They don't care about so many of these issues. They don't care about Indigenous communities because they're not worried about getting water to them. They don't care about so much of this stuff, but they just want to cash in. They just want to cash in on some of that political capital, which is absolutely heartbreaking, devastating, and un-Canadian in so many ways. But I think that there's a lot of important journalism to be done here, getting to the bottom of these stories, working with some of these people. And push comes to shove, I'm going to head out there. But we've had teams. I know Drea's been out to cover some of this as well. But we have to get to the bottom of this story, figure out who was lying, who gained from this. This is like a massive story, and it's incredible. Looking forward to the sort of full report on what was stated by who compared to what actually happened, because making allegations of mass genocide and being like, oh, they're actually just graves that were overgrown, or these are actually standard cemetery sites, and then it was relocated or whatever. Those are entirely and staggeringly different stories, and I don't think the misinformation was done by accident. For all the talk of misinformation, there sure is a heck of a lot of it coming out of Justin Trudeau. So, yeah,
maybe we need to send somebody to Saskatchewan because they claimed 751 unmarked graves constituted a crime scene, that Cow's Nest First Nation. Maybe we should go send somebody there. That's not a far drive. I mean, it is a far drive, but I mean, it's not, it's close enough.
It's worth
there's
it.
a lot of
Rebelfieldreports.com. We'll travel to get the stories. We will do that.
I mean, especially when they're alleging 751 and activists were calling it a crime scene. Did we excavate a single grave? A single one?
And the other thing too is like the amount of, you're dealing with communities that are very often already marginalized, are dealing with a lot, are dealing with lots of pressures, and then you tell them, oh, by the way, like your community was also genocided. That actually does so much harm. Particularly, I mean, if it's true and it's trauma, that should be addressed and it should be dealt with. But if the government or these people are lying for political capital and causing that much harm within a community, it's important to talk to these community members. And I know I've been out to Siksika and Tsuut'ina Nation and some of these other places. And when you talk to them, what the government says they're saying is not what they say. So it would be very interesting to get on the ground, to be speaking with these people, to be getting their perspective of the story, and then even to find out if they want investigations, if they want people to look further, if they want excavations, and the government is saying, no, hold off. Because if the government is propagating all this fear and hysteria that literally led to churches being burned and mass vandalisms and probably one of the greatest sort of attacks on a religious community, very likely in the history of Canada, religious community specifically, obviously the internment of the Japanese, likely one of the bigger sort of racial targetings. But yeah, for sure. Yeah. But if they said all this and then the government is the one preventing further investigation or deterring further investigation, that is a massive story. So yeah, let's look into that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm very curious. So I just want to know, did somebody excavate a single grave to investigate? That's all I want to know. How do we make these grand allegations without following up? It's not like you don't know where the bodies are.
You need like one guy with a shovel.
When you think about the level of sifting for the smallest remains, smallest pieces of DNA that the RCMP and the cops were able to do at the Picton farm, in BC. I mean, they were finding like little tiny bones just because families wanted answers. Why aren't we doing the same thing here? If it is indeed the way you say it is, don't the families deserve to know what happened
and
here?
I think this is very much, it's the same thing. There should be water for these communities. There isn't. There should be transparency on these issues. There isn't, as they use this sort of Indigenous smokescreen of Indian affairs and all of these sorts of things to provide a quality of life and to provide metrics of democracy on a lower level for Indigenous communities than they would for everyone else. And they do it under the guise of, oh, well, we don't want to incur sort of or step on sort of their sort of privileges and rights. That is politicians defending themselves. That isn't advocacy for these communities. They deserve every sort of right and standard. And those families, on a fundamental level, what this is they don't think those lives are worth as much, because the women who were murdered by Picton, that is worth an investigation. But these Indigenous people will score some political capital on the death of their ancestors, their families, whatever it may be. But we're not going to actually go through a full forensic investigation because, they're racist.
Racist. That's right. And then 10 years from now, there will be the more allegations of systemic racism because they'll say, well, those graves were never investigated. Why?
Why didn't we investigate?
Why?
Because we're racist.
Because we're racist. Let's get to the one chat that we have today. Mika, BC, gives us $5. Johnny Rushell. I'm retired, so I have no ability to do a paid rant. I got an inside report. I'm always skeptical of inside reports. That Canada Border Services are understaffed. Well, we know they're understaffed. That's because they laid off a substantial amount of not just border guards, but support staff because of the vaccine mandates. I wonder why are always negotiating contract negotiations after they expire. Well, that's the state of public sector unions. I feel like they're always in a constant state of contract negotiations and renegotiations. That's what it's like when you belong to a big public sector union. I think they're in PSAC. I think that's theirs. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I think that is it. We're 10 minutes past the top of the hour. I know that you're busy, Adam. I'm very, very busy today. Mondays are, well, every day's a Monday for me. Anyway.
And then Saturday and Sunday are also Mondays.
Every day is a Monday. It's like Groundhog Day. It's like Groundhog Day. Anyways, I should thank the team in Toronto for putting together the show. Efron, Olivia, all the back staff, the web editors, everybody who makes sure that you can just click on the link and go straight to the live stream. That requires a lot of work behind the scenes. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Adam, thank you for being my co-pilot this Monday, as always. And thank you to our one lone soul who pitched in. Appreciate that. Every little bit helps. Special shout out to you today because you're the only person. And I'm back here tomorrow with David Menzies. And as my friend David Menzies always says, stay sane.
You know, I'm looking around and this gas is going up even more.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's going to be, I'm seeing it like close to $5 even some parts of Florida. It was probably about $4.15 just a couple weeks ago. So it's going up. And, you know, they're not doing energy in the United States. Now they say they want to get oil from Maduro in Venezuela, which all that's going to do is just line his pockets. And actually, it'll help Russia. They're always talking about, you know, Russia and Putin. Well, they have a very close relationship with Maduro and Putin. And so they're doing that. They'll beg OPEC, but they will not do more energy in the United States. And the result is that they've really reduced our ability to be energy independent and produce our own energy. They're canceling oil and gas leases in places like Alaska. And the people that have to fill up their gas tanks are the ones that are paying the price for those bad policies.